Hey everyone, welcome to the Self-Awareness Journey podcast. I'm Melissa Albers.
And I'm JJ Parker. This podcast is for seekers, seekers of happiness and joy, seekers of a centered approach to success in life, seekers of their true, authentic selves.
Get ready for some real talk on everything from anxiety, emotions, and habits to love, compassion, and forgiveness. We know you'll be challenged and enlightened by this conversation. We're so glad you're here. Let's dive in.
Well, it's starting to become the time in my kids' journey where we have to kind of start talking about college and their future and stuff like that.
Oh, I remember
Right, 'cause
those days.
Our oldest is in 11th grade,
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah. This is the year you start
then
looking.
and right, and
Mhm.
it's like we want to help him start figuring out like what he might want to do, or just start trying to think
Yeah. Oh, I
past
know.
high school.
Oh, I know. I just talked to a client yesterday that was in the same boat. She has 3 boys, and her oldest is a junior. And she said he's so shy and he just doesn't know, I'm so worried he's not
Mm,
going to be able to sort of advocate for himself, or he's not going to know what
yeah, yeah, yeah. My wife's number one concern is like, will they even go to college? Like, do they want to go to college?
Yeah.
Like,
I think that's every parent's concern, to be fair.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, like we want a lot for him, right?
Right.
Like, we want him to be able to you know, use kind of uh, like what we have to offer for him, like
Right.
helping him get
Right.
into college and through college
Right.
and supporting him in through that part of life. And like, we want him to find a passion. We
Mhm.
want him to find a good job. We want him to be like a
Yeah.
successful adult. Like, we want all of these things for him.
Right.
Um,
Does he want
but
any
as
of
a
that? I wonder.
no, as a typical like 17-year-old
Boy.
kid, boy, yeah, even worse, male. Um, like, he doesn't want anything. He's just like, oh no. Like, what do you want to do, Ethan? Just gonna hang out with my friends later. Like, no, out of life, dude. Come on. A little higher level. I'd like spaghetti tonight. Like, okay. Like, I see this is going nowhere.
Well, I think it's really, I think parents are always in that frame, and whether it be, I guess I should correct something I said a minute ago, because you said we really want him to go to college, and I said, well, every parent does. I guess what I would say is what every parent wants, in my opinion, is that their child has every opportunity to be more successful
hmm
than the parent was.
hmm
It's like, I think there's this huge push. You want more for them than they want for themselves. And I think it starts at a young age.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like some bit of human nature,
Yeah.
right? You want like the next generation to be able to do better,
Yeah.
maybe than
Yeah.
you did.
I think subsequent children after the first year are a little more relaxed. At least we were. I mean, oh my gosh, with our first, we just pound, like, poor guy.
Yeah.
It's just like, constant pressure to, well, can't you try to be out? Can't you be this? Can't you do that? Can't you be like, don't you want to try out for this sport? Like, don't you want to try to be on varsity? Don't you want to try to go to the best college that
hmm
you can? What kind of degree do you want? And yeah, it's just like this ridiculous pressure. With the second one, we still had that same kind of pressure, but we were a lot more relaxed. It was
Yeah.
like, well, these are sort of the things that we expect of you, but I personally, as a mom, am not losing sleep like I did with the
Mm.
first one, just because of me, not him.
Sweet. By the time our third hits,
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
just be like, meh, do whatever you want.
Exactly right. You want to live in the garage? That's okay. Yeah, I think
Well, we
there's
see it like,
go ahead.
yeah, we see it like with our kids, right? Like we want stuff for
Yeah,
them, and we kind of want them to want it,
yeah,
but that doesn't happen. And this happens actually all the time. Even like, I see this at work all the time too,
yeah, for sure.
right?
I see it way
So
more. Yeah, for sure. I do too.
this idea that like we might have a coworker
hmm
or an employee, and we just want them to step up into a new role. We want them to take more initiative. We
Mhm.
want things for them.
Mhm.
Like when we can see it, but then if they don't want it,
Yeah.
it becomes really
I
frustrating.
think it's even more frustrating when what we want for them is something that we are offering to give them. You
Hmm.
know, like in the work situation, you talk about,
Mm-hmm.
coworkers and wanting them to step up. If there's free development opportunities or, opportunities for them to grow themselves and they don't take it, and you have had a lot to do with making those options available, it's even more frustrating. And I see it too in coaching all the time.
Mm-hmm.
With leaders that are feeling this huge pressure to provide the perfect conditions and circumstances for people, and then they just can't understand when the person doesn't rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
All the time. So like what's going on there? It's like we see something for somebody, an opportunity, right?
Yeah,
And we say, "Oh, that'd be great for them to take that opportunity," right? Like whether it's like my kids going to college
right.
or a
Or
coworker,
mhm.
uh, maybe stepping into a promotion, and maybe we work so hard to set up a scenario for
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
that makes it as easy as
Right.
possible.
Yes.
And then when they don't take that,
Right.
it feels like a slight against you
It's
or
a huge
a
disappointment. It's a huge
disappointment or
personal
like
disappointment.
I did all this effort to help you and
Yeah.
now you're not
Yeah.
and why, right?
You know what? It isn't even just those obvious cases of parenting and coworkers. You know where else you see it all the
Mm,
time? Any place that you're in relationship with someone. It could be a friend, a best friend, it could be
mhm,
your parents. It
mm,
could it could be your siblings. It could be anybody that you
mhm.
and you know what I think that the link is to all of this is your personal investment and how you tie your success to that person.
Oh, right.
That's
So, like you see yourself as a helpful person
yep.
and maybe part of the story you tell yourself, like your dialogue is like, "Oh, I'm so helpful. I'm going to help this person. I'm going to,
Mhm.
you know,
I
launch
see
them into the
something
next
they don't.
phase." And like you start feeling a bit like the hero character
Mhm.
in this person's life.
Yeah.
And then when they don't do it, that leaves you like with some resentment.
Yeah, and actually people get kinda downright mad about it too. And
Mm,
they actually can start lashing out at the person. This is all
mm-hmm.
under this is all under the covers. I don't think people are overtly throwing themselves into these patterns, but I think it's very,
Yeah.
very common. And I
Yeah.
think, like with parenting, it's more obvious. Like you can say, well, this is the experience I had when I was growing up in my family structure, where I lived, what was available to me. And I'm going to have it be different for my kids. My kids are going to have an experience that I didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes more sense. It's like everybody can see the 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 clear intention, and that a parent feels overly responsible for their children. Most parents do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so they take on that burden of responsibility when really they have no business taking on that burden when it gets
Mm,
to a certain point, right? So I think
mm-hmm.
it's more obvious when you look at like relationships like parent and children, but it becomes a lot more complicated when it is you in relationship with other people and you are the person trying to elevate them beyond a state that they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
It really at that point has nothing to do with that person.
Mm,
It has nothing to do with that person. It has everything to do with you and what are you trying to accomplish?
mm-hmm.
What are you trying to what's the story you're telling yourself that this person and what they do that you have such a great investment in that you're going to be angry if they don't do it or you're going to be
Yeah.
resentful, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Or at least frustrated.
At least frustrated. Yeah. I had a particular client years ago and he's actually the one who gave me and us this great idea for the podcast today. He um in his early stages of being a manager, this is a very common thing that he would do is he would sit
Mm,
down and during his one-to-ones, he felt he was doing them a favor. He would sit down with all of his direct reports and he would say,
mm-hmm.
even if they had been in the same role for 15 years and it was manufacturing and they loved being in their role and they had no intention of doing something different, he would have this pressure, this internal pressure to offer them something else. Don't you want to do this? Don't you want to be
Mm,
more? Don't you want
mm-hmm.
to make more money? Don't you want to be a manager? Like really, really pushing. And they didn't. But he felt, since he had been elevated to this new role, that was what his job was, is to constantly push other people to elevate.
Mm-hmm.
And he had such a hard time with the fact that a lot of people just really didn't want that. They were very happy in
Yeah.
the role that they had. They were very happy with the money they had. They had a lot of other interests, a lot of other things that they just didn't have that same investment
Yep.
at work. And he couldn't understand that. And it
Yeah.
became something that was a huge burden for him and not them.
Yeah. I think that's a key part of this is that like what I'll see is like a lot of times we'll try to map our own
Mm-hmm.
track or our own life desires
Mm-hmm.
onto someone else. So like what
Yes.
I want for
Yeah.
someone is for them to do the thing I want to do
Yes.
or follow the path I went on,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yes.
But that's not for everybody, like you said. Like actually that's only for one person and that's me. So
Right.
so like but it's so easy to map like
I know.
that onto other people and say, "Oh, shouldn't you want to climb the corporate ladder? Because I climbed the corporate
Yeah.
ladder, and I think you should do that
And
too." And some people are like, "I don't want to do
yeah, I have
that.
no
Like,
interest in doing
you
that.
ruined your family doing that. Why would I want to do that?"
Right. Right, right. Or I have more interests outside of my office that make it absolutely fine for me
Totally.
to make the money I
Yeah.
make and do the stuff I do so I can be out of there
Yeah.
at 5 every day and go do my
Yeah.
thing or whatever.
And similar with kids, right? Like a lot of us like followed a very prescriptive, almost like high school,
Yeah.
college job track.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not for our
Yeah.
kids, right?
Yeah. My
But we want to we say like, "Hey, that that process got me to where I am, so maybe that will work for my kids,"
right.
right?
Last night my daughter was over and we were watching Father of the Bride. So she's getting married. So we're having fun watching all these wedding
So you have to
movies.
watch all the marriage
Yeah, they're super
movies.
funny. Well, this one is actually not the original with Steve Martin. This one is with Andy Garcia and Gloria Estefan. So it's a Cuban Latin version,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
it's exactly the same thing. It's like he had these two daughters. Andy Garcia had these two daughters, and he wanted them. One was a lawyer, and one was all over the map. She wanted to design dresses, but she was young and didn't have, she didn't show any drive or initiative. And
Mhm.
he had come from Cuba with a couple of nickels in his pocket. And throughout the whole movie, he just kept like pounding this drum, like, this is what
Mm.
I started. And then I did this. And he was a very prominent architect that was well
Mm.
known in Miami, right, in the movie. And he just kept pounding on that drum to a point where he drove his family apart
Mm.
because he was so adamant that he gave them these opportunities and they were not taking them and it was their fault,
Yeah.
to a point
Yep.
where he was. And how many movies are made of that? Parents being
Yeah,
disappointed, but
so many.
a
So this is like
million. Yeah.
like one of
Cliche.
the handfuls of like
Yeah.
movie templates.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But, and so, yeah, so I think it's really, really typical. But, another place that I think that um, I mentioned it just briefly, but I think another place is with friends.
Mm.
I've had friends that have been close friends, and I've been like, like I've always talked about in the pods before, I had a pretty rough upbringing when I was young. My mom and I moved a lot, divorced many times. My mom was divorced multiple times, and we did not have a lot of money when I was growing up. And so it was challenging. And so I worked so hard to not replicate that.
Mm.
Somewhere I got it in my craw that kids either replicate what they know or they do the opposite of what they had.
Mhm.
And I was just going to be that opposite, right? So I worked my tail feathers off to make a place for myself that I'm proud of. And because of that, there's a lot of times where I still catch myself seeing my friend groups and thinking about it from that perspective.
Mm.
It's like, why don't you? Right? And the minute you start any phrase
Yep.
with why
Right.
don't you or why can't you, there that you know you're on the wrong path.
Hmm.
Um, but that's happened where I've just not been able to understand my friend's lot in life, knowing what their childhood was like, knowing what that they were given every opportunity, and then they don't take it. They don't take it. They don't
Yeah.
create more, and they don't
Yep.
stand in their own power, that they just allow whatever, it's good enough, it doesn't matter. And that's been something that's been very challenging for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very interesting spot where it's like when, especially if you've come from,
Yeah.
nothing,
Yeah.
and then you see someone who had a bunch of resources available to them,
Yes.
like
Yep.
they could have got, like they could have gone to college, they could have done this, and
Yeah.
then like, why didn't you take those
Yeah.
opportunities?
Yeah.
Like you had it all in front of you, and I had to grind it out
Right.
for a decade,
Right, right.
right?
Yeah, and I just think, again, there's a judgment in there, right? There's a
Hmm.
huge judgment in there on my part, and that's my inventory I need to be taking. It's like, why am I so invested in that they should be doing something differently? Like,
Hmm.
and why do I get really mad when I see that they're not? I mean,
Yeah.
even in our 50s now, it's like, that's not fair. That's not
Hmm.
fair. And yet I think it's really normal human nature.
Yep. Yeah, and like you were saying earlier, when you peel back some of those decisions
Mhm.
that people make for themselves,
Mhm.
it it often just comes down to like the things they value are just different than the things you value,
Right. Right.
right? Like if some people might like value, right, the climbing the corporate ladder, but
Mhm.
like you said, others might value their like like their hobby, like I know
Yep.
people that like have good enough jobs, but their passion is playing music, and
Yeah,
so
right.
they'll it's like the job is just an end to give them enough money and
Yeah,
mostly
to
time
do
so
what
they
they
can go
love.
do all their
Yeah,
gigs on the weekend.
yeah. There's something in here, I think, to just recognize in our own feelings, because I think that in the judgment, I think that there's a mirror happening there. I think that sometimes when people are faced with the same stuff and you want to push something for someone else, like you want them to have
Yeah.
something, um, and they don't take it, I honestly think that there's something in here that people mirror and say, I know what that feels like. I know
Hmm.
how this is. I've been in this place. Or the crossroads that they're in scares me because I recognize that. Like I
Hmm.
recognize their feeling. I recognize their situation. And I'm worried because it reminds me of me. It reminds me of
Yeah.
it reminds
Yep.
me of where I was and what I could have done. And I'm so
Hmm.
afraid that somehow watching them or sensing where they are, that it's somehow going to come back on me.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I think
Or
that's where it gets really sticky, and that's where that
yep.
investment comes.
Yep. Yeah, we have some younger friends like in their early 20s,
Yeah.
and like kind of watching them and navigate their early 20s. I mean, you know what
I
your
know.
early 20s were like you have no money, like
Right.
even roommates and rent is a
Right.
mess, right?
Right.
Like or
Yes.
first jobs is a mess. Like it's all a
It's
mess.
all a mess.
And but watch, like talking to them about where they are in life very much reminds me and my wife of like what it was like for us then.
Yeah.
And you're right, it was scary.
Yeah, it
And
is
all we want
scary.
to do is like try to help,
Yeah.
but
Right.
part of it's like
Well-meaning.
going through it, you know?
Well-meaning. Let me sit
Yeah,
down and give you a bunch of advice. You didn't ask for
right,
it, but it's
exactly.
so important that you hear it.
Yeah, right. So one other, just to shift it a little bit,
Yeah.
is another thing I think about with this idea of like wanting more for others than they want themselves. And
Mhm.
you were talking about how parents want the next generation to do better than they did.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting concept because I think over the past, we'll see. I'm a little skeptical about how far that
Mm.
line of thinking can go
Yeah. Hmm.
because over the past, say even 100 years
Right.
with with technology. I mean, think about 100, let's say 120 years. Um, like cars, planes, computers, internets, like, I
Yeah.
mean, so crazy amounts of sort of like economic explosion.
Yeah.
Um, like how, I
And
mean, look at a
development
house
and
today,
mhm.
look into the very basic minimum house that you would buy today
Right.
versus one 100 years ago. It's insane,
Yes,
right?
you're right. Yeah, yeah.
Um, so like how far can this like improvement of quality of life go?
Oh, I
Right?
agree.
And
Mhm.
will we have a generation, and I'm actually kind of wondering if we're at it right now, where our children might not actually be able to have an increased in, and this is again, this is a, I'm using like a, almost like a, I don't like it, but like a classic measurement of quality
Yeah,
of
yeah.
life, which generally equates to
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
which I'm
yeah.
not a super fan of.
Right.
But this idea, like, will they actually be able to like have a job that they make more than I do, that
Right.
they have a bigger house, they have a fancier car,
Yeah, that they
like
have
they kind of
more.
like,
They just have more.
they have more on those measures than I did. And I'm like, that's good. That's a pretty high bar.
Well, you know what?
So I can't want that for them because like it would put them in a really pressured situation.
Well, herein lies the whole conversation. We want more for them than they want for themselves. But it is like, what does your term more even mean? And the
Right.
things that you're valuing, like I think we talked about this in an earlier pod, which we probably have, but there we were talking about how each generation maps out, right? And the generations
Mm-hmm.
before us, it was always like, look at what our generation did for you. Like, look what
Yeah.
we've done to make your life wonderful and to be in this amazing country. And all that's truth, right? Okay, but as the generations have been continuing, they were saying, where was it? Maybe it was a Vista Ching. I can't remember, but they were saying how now this generation is looking at the older generations and saying, look what a mess you've made. We don't
Yeah.
want this. We don't want any part of this. And so they are radically going in a different direction, which then
Yeah.
causes our viewpoint of what, quote, more is for them. And it flies in the face of that.
Yeah. I was just thinking, so like, yeah, you're very specifically kind of like describing the baby boomer generation, which is like sort of like this almost like status symbol,
Yeah.
like, hey, the big house shows how successful I was, blah, 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 right? Um, but then like, so well, the younger generation, it's like much more about lifestyle
Yeah.
and time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then I'm thinking like, oh, what's us Gen Xers thing? All the Gen Xers are trying to do is like keep this shit together.
Totally.
Like
Oh my
that's
God,
all we're
yes,
doing.
absolutely. We're just
We're
hanging
not
on
trying
by
to
a
we're
thread.
not trying to make it better. We're not trying to make it, we're just trying to just freaking keep it somewhat duct taped together until the kids can just take it over.
We're
I
strong
can't
arming.
wait till they
Oh
do
my God,
that.
you're so right. It's like we're strong. We've got the straight arms going on either side, right? Like
I know,
trying to get
right?
the Heisman to the old and the Heisman to the
Uh,
new, and everybody just leave us alone. We're doing our best.
I know, and there's not that many of us because there was a population dip then, and it just like, it's too much.
Oh, I just feel so good. This is such a nice way to start the day, having this conversation. I feel like a loser. I'm gonna go crawl under my bed. My big bed with really fancy bedding. I'm just gonna crawl
Well,
under it.
at least we can take it in good humor.
Oh,
Well, yeah. Well, this is fun. This is a good conversation. Yeah, the for right or wrong, one of the things that whenever I get into a thought pattern or like a little cycle of like, oh, like I really want to help my kid figure out what his career is going to be and this and that. I just always go back to like thinking like that's me. That's on me, right?
yeah.
That's not a him problem. That's a me
Yeah,
problem.
exactly. That's a
Um,
good way to say that. Yeah.
and just like calm it down. Like you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like all the pressure or all of my anxiety
Mhm.
pressured onto
An
him isn't going to
expectation.
make him act any better than he
No.
is now. It probably will actually make him act
Yeah, and
worse.
definitely pull away more because that expectation is just
Yeah.
insurmountable. Like they're not
So like
yeah.
if I want to build a better relationship with him, if I do actually want him to figure it out, I have to give him the space
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah.
And like the support to say, And the support for him to say, like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like, I
exactly.
don't know what I want to do.
Exactly.
And that's
Yeah,
okay.
but I'm working
So
on a tiny house on
let,
wheels in the backyard
yeah.
right now. Uh,
All
yeah, it's
right, cool.
interesting.
Well, this is a fun conversation.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's a really good opportunity for people to just sort of consider where their expectations are with the people around them and who they're close to.
Yep. And just ask, instead of jumping to like, here's what you should do,
Yeah.
or mapping your experience onto someone else,
Yeah,
just ask them what they find valuable in life.
totally.
What are their
That's so good.
goals and values, and then if you're gonna give a suggestion, base it on that.
And be curious instead of judgmental. Yeah.
Did you enjoy this episode? Please go to your favorite podcast platform to subscribe, rate, and leave a review so others can discover it as well.
Growing self-awareness is a lifelong journey, and there's always further to go. And it's better when we're all in it together. Please think of someone you know who could benefit from hearing today's conversation and share this episode with them. We can't thank you enough for listening. Until next time, happy exploring, seekers.